The farmhouse in rural Kentucky was supposed to be a sanctuary. Family cookouts, Christmas mornings, and Sunday prayers around the table created the illusion of unity. But years later, that same house would sit abandoned, its windows boarded, its history whispered like a cautionary tale. The question no one could answer was simple. How did a family so admired in public become the subject of scandalous rumors behind closed doors? To neighbors, David Carson was a hard-working foreman who raised his children with discipline. His brothers, Robert, Charles, and Henry, were frequent guests at reunions, bringing laughter, stories from the road, and a sense of warmth. Madeline, only 19, seemed to adore her extended family. She played the role of dutiful daughter, smiling at Sunday dinners, never hinting at secrets. But small details began to surface. Madeline's late-night absences at family gatherings, the way Robert's hand lingered too long on her shoulder, the silence in the room whenever David entered unexpectedly. Nobody dared to speak, yet everyone felt something was wrong. What nobody knew was that the truth, once exposed, would not only break their family, it would leave an entire community stunned. Robert Carson was always the entertainer, a truck driver from Indiana. He rolled into gatherings with crude jokes and gifts from the road. But behind the laughter, his life was crumbling under mounting debts. Charles, the disciplined army man from Fort Campbell, carried himself with honor in public, but drank heavily in private. Henry, the youngest, a teacher in Cincinnati, lived quietly but wrestled with loneliness that consumed him at night. To Madeline, each uncle offered something different. Robert's reckless charm, Charles's commanding presence, Henry's attentive ear. She gravitated toward them, often leaving her cousins to spend time with the men. At first, it looked harmless, just a niece enjoying family bonds. But there was something in the way they responded, something that hinted at blurred boundaries. Questions arose in hushed conversations. Why did Robert drive hundreds of miles just for a weekend? Why did Charles linger long after his duties called him back to base? Why did Henry find excuses to visit more often than needed? Nobody asked aloud, but the answers were forming in the shadows. And soon, one shocking discovery would force every buried suspicion into the light. It was at the summer reunions along the Ohio River where the first cracks widened. Relatives gathered under string lights, music playing, children running barefoot through the grass. Madeline should have been with them. Instead, she slipped quietly into the night, disappearing for hours without explanation. Some whispered that she was sneaking off to meet friends. Others guessed she was simply restless, longing for independence. But the truth was closer to home, literally. Robert's truck was often missing from the driveway at the same time. Charles could be found on the porch smoking alone. Henry wandered off with vague excuses. The older relatives noticed but turned away. No one wanted to accuse without proof. It was easier to ignore, to pretend the Carson family remained untouched by scandal. But silence has a way of compounding guilt. And every unanswered question piled higher. Where did Madeline go? Who was she with? Why did her face glow with something more than teenage rebellion when she returned? For David, her father, these late-night absences became the first signs that something was slipping out of his control. He just didn't yet know how far it had already gone. David Carson believed rules kept a family intact. A man who built homes with his hands and worked long hours in construction. He expected order under his roof. Madeline had always been obedient, or so he thought. Lately, though, he noticed changes. Her sharp tone, the way she avoided eye contact, the excuses about where she'd been. At first, he chalked it up to youth. 19, with dreams bigger than her small-town world. He had no idea the defiance was rooted in something closer, something far more dangerous. Neighbors admired David's stern presence, comparing him to a soldier without the uniform. He believed that strength alone could keep his daughter safe. What he didn't realize was that strength couldn't shield her from the influences already inside his family circle. Madeline wasn't afraid of his temper anymore. She met his warnings with silence, her expression unreadable. To David, this was disrespect. To others watching closely, it was something different, control. The turning point came when his suspicions grew too heavy to ignore. Soon, David would step into his own home at the wrong moment, and what he saw would strip away everything he thought he knew about loyalty, blood, and trust. It was supposed to be just another night on the road. David had taken an overnight construction job in Cleveland, leaving the farmhouse quiet. But a sudden schedule change sent him home early, well past midnight. He unlocked the door, expecting silence. Instead, the low hum of a television filled the room. There, in the living room where his children once opened Christmas gifts, David froze. Robert, his own brother, sat too close to Madeline. Their laughter was intimate, their posture unmistakable. And then David saw it, the undeniable betrayal unfolding before his eyes. His chest tightened. Rage collided with disbelief, his world collapsing in a single moment. Robert stumbled to his feet, stammering excuses. Madeline said nothing, her eyes locked on her father, with a strange calm that unnerved him more than the act itself. Questions raced through David's mind. How long had this been going on? Who else knew? And why did his daughter look more defiant than ashamed? Robert bolted for the door before David could react. Left in the silence of that broken room, David's life as he knew it had ended. But the nightmare was only just beginning. David's fury shook the walls of the farmhouse. He demanded answers, his voice cracking under the weight of betrayal. Madeline stood motionless, her silence a weapon more piercing than words. He turned to her, desperate for an explanation. "Why?" he shouted, his voice breaking. She gave none. Robert, cornered by his brother's rage, sputtered excuses about misunderstandings, about harmless fun. David lunged, fists clenched, until Robert shoved past him and vanished into the night, leaving only tire tracks in the gravel. David's chest heaved with anger, but beneath it all was fear. Fear that this wasn't just a single act of betrayal. Madeline's refusal to defend herself only deepened his suspicion. Was Robert the only one? Or had she been hiding even more? The storm inside the house didn't end when Robert left. It lingered in the silence between father and daughter, in the unspoken tension that made the air heavy. David couldn't bring himself to strike her, yet he couldn't let go of what he had seen. But his questions wouldn't stay unanswered for long, because soon, in a moment of desperation, he would find proof that his worst fears didn't even scratch the surface of the truth. Robert's escape left the farmhouse in eerie silence, but in his rush, he made one mistake. His phone, buzzing faintly on the coffee table, remained behind. David stared at it, his pulse pounding. He hesitated only a moment before picking it up. If the truth was there, he needed it, no matter how painful. The screen lit with messages. Not casual banter, not harmless jokes, but threads that chilled him. Photos of Madeline, late-night arrangements, words laced with familiarity no uncle should ever use. David's throat tightened as he scrolled further, each swipe cutting deeper into his belief that this was a single act. The more he read, the worse it became. Mentions of meeting again, coded language that suggested planning, secrecy, even competition. Robert hadn't been acting alone. David's hands trembled. The betrayal wasn't contained, it was spreading. His brothers, the very men he trusted with his family, seemed to be part of something larger. But the most shocking realization wasn't what Robert had done. It was the possibility that all three brothers were entangled in the same web. And if that was true, then Madeline wasn't just a victim. The phone revealed patterns David couldn't ignore. Robert's messages referenced keeping it quiet from Charles. Another thread hinted at Henry's involvement. Yet each conversation suggested secrecy, as though none of them knew the full scope of what the others were doing. David's heart sank. This wasn't coincidence. It was coordination, even if fragile. His brothers weren't just complicit. They were bound together by shared guilt. And the one name tying it all together was his daughter's. He read a line that stopped him cold. She said, "It's our secret." It was Robert's message. But who was she truly protecting? Herself, or the dangerous balance she had created among them? David paced the living room, torn between denial and fury. His entire foundation, his bloodline, his trust, his role as protector, was crumbling. Every unanswered question from the past year suddenly clicked into place, yet none gave him peace. The farmhouse, once filled with laughter, now felt like a trap. He knew what came next. He would have to confront Charles and Henry, but he had no idea that their reactions would reveal a truth far more disturbing than the evidence on that phone. The next evening, David called his brothers to the farmhouse. His voice, hard and commanding, left no room for excuses. Robert showed up first, face pale, avoiding eye contact. Charles followed, calm as ever, his military poise unshaken. Henry arrived last, nervous sweat beading his forehead, shifting from foot to foot as though he already carried guilt. David slammed Robert's phone on the table. The messages glowed like open wounds. "Explain this," he barked, his voice raw. Robert stammered, denying what was plain to see. Henry whispered apologies under his breath, insisting it was a mistake. Charles, though, remained stone-faced, watching his brother's rage with an unnerving composure. "Don't lie to me," David shouted, his fist slamming the wood. "All of you, what have you done?" The silence that followed was suffocating. Robert looked away. Henry trembled. Charles leaned forward, his voice calm, almost measured. "You don't understand, David," he said, breaking the silence. "You think this was us. But it wasn't. Not entirely." David's anger faltered for a moment. His brother's words hinted at a truth he hadn't considered, and Charles was about to lay it bare. Charles met David's eyes, steady and unflinching. "You think we pulled her into this, that we corrupted her. But you're wrong. She knew what she was doing. Every step." The words hung in the air, heavier than any accusation. David froze, trying to process what he had just heard. Henry's head dropped, tears welling, as though he could no longer carry the weight. Robert muttered protests, but Charles silenced him with a glare. "She played us separately," Charles continued. "Whispers, secrets, moments that seemed innocent until they weren't. She knew how to keep us apart, to make each of us believe we were the only one, until she chose to bring it into the open." David's stomach churned. Could his daughter really have engineered this? Or was this Charles's attempt to twist the blame? Madeline's silence, her unreadable eyes that night in the living room, it all came rushing back. Charles leaned closer, his voice like steel. "She wanted you to find out. Don't you see? None of this was an accident." For the first time, David felt his rage falter, replaced by something far worse. The farmhouse kitchen was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator. David's brothers sat in uneasy stillness, waiting for him to react. But before he could, a soft voice broke the tension. Madeline stepped into the doorway. She had been listening the entire time. Her expression was unreadable, neither ashamed nor proud, but calm, almost calculated. "You're asking the wrong questions," she said, her voice steady. "You want to know who started it. Maybe you should ask why you never noticed what was happening right in front of you." Her words landed like knives. David staggered back, unsure whether to feel betrayed, horrified, or guilty. He demanded answers, pressing her to confess whether Charles's claims were true. Madeline's reply was maddeningly vague. "No one forced me," she whispered, "but don't think I didn't pay a price." David's chest tightened. Was she the victim of manipulation, or the manipulator herself? Her eyes locked with his, daring him to decide which truth he believed. And in that moment, David realized the horror wasn't just in what had been done. It was in not knowing where the blame truly belonged. David's rage erupted with the force of a man who had lost everything. His fist slammed against the counter, his voice breaking into hoarse shouts. "You're my daughter. How could you let this happen?" Madeline stood firm, her silence infuriating him more than words could. Robert shifted uncomfortably. Henry wiped his eyes, but Charles remained calm, watching David's collapse like a spectator. Inside, David was crumbling. His role as protector, his belief that discipline and rules could shield his family, all of it had collapsed in a single week. Shame clawed at him, mixing with fury until he no longer knew who to direct it at. His brothers? His daughter? Or himself? He turned on Robert, shoving him against the wall. He spat curses at Henry, accusing him of cowardice. But when he looked back at Madeline, his anger faltered. There was no fear in her eyes, only an unsettling defiance. For the first time in his life, David questioned his own power as a father. He had always believed his control was absolute. Now, faced with this silence, this betrayal, he realized he was powerless, and the weight of that truth nearly broke him. Word spread faster than David could contain it. Relatives who once gathered joyfully at the farmhouse now avoided it, whispering in church pews and supermarket aisles. Neighbors, once warm and welcoming, exchanged uneasy glances whenever a Carson walked by. No one knew the full truth, but the fragments that escaped were enough. Robert stopped attending family events altogether, retreating into silence. Henry buried himself in work at his school, but parents began whispering behind his back, suspicious of his presence around students. Charles alone carried himself without shame, though his composure made others uneasy. Madeline withdrew from public life entirely. She stopped answering her friends' calls, stopped posting on social media, and rarely left the house except at night. Her silence gave her an air of mystery that only deepened the speculation. Was she a victim, or had she masterminded the destruction herself? David bore the heaviest burden. Once respected as a hard-working foreman and strict father, he now carried the weight of humiliation. He could no longer walk into town without feeling eyes on his back. The Carson family wasn't just fractured, it was disintegrating, and the community around them could sense it. The farmhouse, once the heart of the Carson legacy, became a shell of its former self. The porch where cousins had once played sat in silence. Weeds crept up through the gravel drive. Windows darkened, their reflections no longer carrying the warmth of family gatherings. David couldn't stand to stay there. Every room carried ghosts of betrayal. The living room where he caught Robert, the kitchen where Madeline's cryptic words cut him to pieces, the porch where Charles calmly shifted blame. He abandoned the house, moving into a small apartment on the edge of town. Robert drifted away entirely, his truck spotted occasionally on distant highways, but never again in Columbus. Henry kept to his classroom, but whispers followed him until he, too, faded into obscurity. Charles remained unchanged, his calmness unnerving to those who still encountered him. Madeline disappeared most completely. She left the farmhouse one night and never returned, her absence leaving only unanswered questions. The house stood silent, its walls holding secrets too heavy for anyone to face. Once a place of celebration, it became a monument to disgrace, avoided by neighbors and feared by relatives who could not bear to step inside again. The Carson name, once spoken with respect, became a quiet warning. In Columbus, neighbors lowered their voices when discussing the family. In Kentucky, relatives chose distance rather than confrontation. The farmhouse remained empty, its silence louder than any confession. David Carson lived like a man hollowed out. He went to work, came home, and avoided conversation. He still asked himself the same questions every night. Was Madeline exploited by three corrupt men, or had she been the one pulling every string? Had he failed as a father, or had he been the target of his daughter's unthinkable manipulation? Robert vanished into the highways, his laughter long gone. Henry retreated into routine, shrinking from the world. Charles stood unshaken, his calmness only deepening the mystery. And Madeline, the center of it all, left nothing behind but doubt. The truth never came fully into the light. There was no trial, no confession, no closure. Only fragments, only silence. And so, the Carson story lingers not as an answer, but as a question. How well do we really know those we love? How much trust can blood demand before it breaks? For the Carsons, those questions became their legacy and their curse. If you found this video informative, please give it a thumbs up, share this video, and subscribe for more deep dives into true crime cases. Thanks for watching. Until next time, stay safe.